I am Samantha Carter, 30 years old, and tonight marks the 80th birthday of my grandmother, Margaret Carter. Standing in the middle of a lavish penthouse in the Manhattan skyline, where crystal chandeliers sparkle like 1,000 frozen tears in the air, and the clinking of wine glasses resonates like a sad song of power and vanity, I feel like a misfit who has mistakenly entered the realm of chosen souls. The scent of expensive Parisian perfume mixed with the scent of classic mahogany wafts through the air, creating an air of suffocating glamour. But to me, it is just a taste of distance, of a world to which I have never truly belonged. Someone might think this is a perfect party, a night of unforgettable memories. But to me, it is nothing more than a tragedy in which I am forced to play the role of an outsider, a shadow with no name, no place. I chose a simple, elegant, but discreet navy blue dress as a way to blend in with the crowd even though I wanted to disappear into thin air. It was a stark contrast to the bold flamboyance of Aunt Elizabeth and her cousins, James, Laura, Claire, who strode like gilded peacocks ready to peck at anyone who strayed into their prestigious territory, even if that person's surname was Carter. And as if it were scripted, Aunt Elizabeth, her honeyed yet sarcastic tone, launched her usual attack. "Oh, my dear Samantha," she said, her cold eyes scanning me as if assessing a defective item. The look said it all. I was not worthy of breathing this air of luxury. "You're still in Queens? Really? The Carters can't afford to have a member who lives so modestly. How about I give you a small allowance so you can live up to the Carter name?" The tone was sarcastic, as if each word was dripping poison into my heart. My cousin James seized the opportunity like a seasoned hunter, raising his wrist to show off his new Patek Philippe, a dazzling flash of gold, which I knew was worth a year's worth of my hard work, if not more. "That's right, Samantha." He laughed. "Why bother? Money opens doors you wouldn't even dare imagine." Laura and Claire giggled, their eyes darting over me like daggers. "I heard your apartment is tiny. No balcony to hang your clothes on," Claire whispered, and Laura laughed as if it were the best joke of the evening. Each laugh, each word was like a cold needle stabbing into my heart, reminding me of my role in this family, a forgotten, withered branch, an unwanted blemish in the glorious family picture. At the head of the table, my grandmother Margaret sat like a queen in her silent castle, her sharp eyes scanning each face. She said nothing, just watched, like a conductor waiting for her turn to speak or a silent judge weighing her sentence. She was always like that, quiet but with a hidden power that no one dared to underestimate. Every gesture, every glance seemed calculated, as if the whole room was acting out a play she had written. When Aunt Elizabeth concluded in a tone that was almost an indictment, "Samantha Carter clearly doesn't belong here. She's just a stranger clinging to our family's light." I felt something flare up inside me. It wasn't a feeling of self-pity or resentment, but an awakening. Some force urged me not to be silent any longer. I couldn't let them continue to trample me like a freeloader. Quietly, I took a thick envelope from my purse, sealed with the bright red wax seal of Carter Properties, and placed it on the gleaming mahogany table. The sound was faint, but in this room it resonated like the sound of a god's hammer striking a stage. The air seemed to stretch and freeze. The jazz stopped mid-beat, as if the orchestra itself were holding its breath in anticipation. Every gaze, from Elizabeth, her face twitching with shock, to James, his brows furrowed, to Laura and Claire, their mouths agape, was fixed on the red envelope that lay motionless on the table like a declaration of war. Then, for the first time since I had entered the room, a strange gleam flashed in Margaret's eyes. Half appreciation, half satisfaction. Those old but never dim eyes gleamed with the light as if the gears of time had finally turned at the moment she had been waiting for. She looked at me as if I had just completed a move she had planned long ago, as if I and no one else were her trump card. What was inside the envelope? What secret could change the color of this entire banquet? Why was she looking at me like I held the key to a coup? I didn't know everything, but in that moment I knew one thing for sure. Things were about to change. Those who had mocked me would bow their heads. A new era was about to begin, and this time I, Samantha Carter, would be at the helm. I still vividly remember the stories my parents told me about Carter Properties, the real estate empire that Margaret built with her own bare hands. It was not an inheritance from previous generations, but the result of the indomitable will of a single woman in an era full of barriers. She started from scratch, just an unknown broker in the 1970s, working in a cramped temporary office with an old crackling land phone. She said that in the early days, she walked around the neighborhoods, knocked on every door, faced countless skeptical eyes and cold rejections. But she never stopped. With a bold vision and an iron will, she turned barren lands into vibrant residential areas, turned empty skies into proud skyscrapers, and gradually raised Carter Properties to become a corporation worth more than $300 million. It is not just a journey to wealth, but a legend, a living testament to the power of perseverance and tireless work. But my family's fate took a different turn. My mother, Anna, was Margaret's only child. She was raised in a world of luxury, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and the sound of pianos every evening. But she never belonged to that world. She always rejected lavish parties, formal meetings, and relationships that revolved around money and fame. When she met my father, David, a simple civil engineer with calloused hands, she chose to love him with the purest sincerity, unconditionally, without calculation. My father was a quiet, kind man who always put his family first. Their marriage, though stable and happy, was considered a stain by the Carter family. How could you throw away everything we had built to be with such an empty man? Aunt Elizabeth had screamed that at a party. And from that moment on, the door between our branch of the family and the rest of the Carter clan was slammed shut forever. From then on, we lived as exiles, isolated, considered traitors to the family's ideals. I grew up in a small apartment in Queens, far from my cousins' villas with swimming pools and private gardeners. While James, Laura, and Claire traveled to the Maldives every summer, attended expensive private schools, and were pampered with meaningless gifts, I was taught to save every penny. And my parents instilled the values of hard work and honesty. I remember the evenings we sat around the small dining table, calculating our expenses, the trips to the market to find discounted but nutritious items, and the stories of the struggles of making a decent living. I never felt deprived. On the contrary, I felt full, surrounded by love and warmth. Sometimes I even felt sorry for James, Laura, and Claire, who grew up with no sense of happiness, no understanding of what life was about beyond the numbers on a check. The values my parents instilled in me have become the core of who I am. I believe that success is not measured by how much you have, but by how much value you bring to life. I chose to study urban planning, not to build more buildings for the rich, but to help create livable communities where people can breathe, laugh, and share. I am proud of the path I have chosen, and of the kindness my parents instilled in me from my childhood. Yet there are times when I wonder, does Margaret see me differently? Is there an understanding behind her silent gaze? Or will I forever be just a crack in the solid stone wall of the Carter family? The contrast between the world of luxury and my simple, meaningful life had deepened my sense of being on the outside, of always being on the outside. I didn't belong in the expensive dresses, the champagne parties, the polished pleasantries. But Margaret's look at me that night, a look of approval and mystery, and the glint of light when I placed the envelope on the table, like a small crack in the thick ice of years, revealing something no one else had seen. It gave me pause. Maybe she saw something in me that others had missed. Maybe the envelope was more than a protest. It was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where I was no longer the outsider, but the one holding the guiding thread, guiding the Carter family's destiny in a different direction. What no one in the Carter family ever knew, and perhaps if they did, they would never believe, was the secret but meaningful connection between Margaret and me. In their eyes, I was just an ordinary, plain, old-fashioned Samantha Carter, a shadowy figure not worth mentioning. They had no idea that over the years, Margaret and I had kept in touch, had met regularly, not in fancy restaurants, not at parties reeking of fame, but in a humble little coffee shop in Brooklyn, hidden behind quiet streets, away from the scrutiny and gossip of Manhattan's upper class. That coffee shop, with its old dark wood tables and the rich aroma of roasted coffee wafting through the air, had become our own world. A warm oasis in the cold desert, where we could be ourselves without having to play a role, without having to wear a mask. Margaret, The woman the world, including her own family, always saw as a symbol of strictness and coldness, living only for work and profit, became a completely different person every time she sat across from me in the familiar corner of the cafe. There, she shed her shell of a strong woman, revealing her gentleness and a rare bit of fragility. She told me about her arduous career when she was just an unknown broker, quietly building a big dream from the ashes of reality. You know, Samantha, she would say, gently raising her lips to the steaming cup of tea, success is not in a thick wallet or a fancy car. It is in every drop of sweat, every sleepless night, and most importantly, in the perseverance to never give up. There were times when I wanted to stop, wanted to throw everything away. But then I thought, if not me, then who? If I don't believe in myself, who else can? She didn't brag about her million-dollar deals or huge profits, but quietly shared her stumbles, her failures, and how she learned from them to move forward, resilient and unwavering. I told her about my life too, my small apartment in Queens, my urban planning work, and the projects I was working on to make the city a better place for everyone. She listened without interrupting, without the pity or sarcasm that Aunt Elizabeth and the rest of her relatives did. She asked me about my aspirations, my obstacles, what kept me going. You have a beautiful soul. She used to smile, her eyes shining with affection, not chasing fame and fortune, but choosing the difficult path to do good for society. That's something people like Elizabeth will never understand. And she appreciated my integrity, my humanitarian vision, and my love for the community, things that my relatives never cared about or appreciated. They only knew the lavish projects, the profit margins, and the ostentatious reputation. But they didn't understand or care about the long-term consequences for the invisible people on the financial statements. As for me, I was always left out of family gatherings, a symbolic decoration of full presence. They invited me not because I was wanted, but to present the false picture of family perfection. At noisy cocktail parties, I was often passed over as if invisible. If lucky, a few perfunctory questions and then ignored. I still remember James's disdainful glance when I talked about the social housing I was planning, or Laura's giggles when I emphasized the role of green space in the city. To them, my ideals were a strange thing, a game for losers, unworthy of existing in the gilded world they lived in. Little did they know, it was those secret meetings with Margaret that kept me from collapsing, that gave me a confidence that should have long since faded. The stark contrast between the public image of Margaret, a woman of steel, cold and proud, and the image of my warm, gentle grandmother in the quiet space of the coffee shop made me unable to stop asking questions. Why did she choose me to share things she had never told anyone? Why did she trust me, someone the whole family despised? Could it be that, after all, she saw something in me that I had not yet clearly seen? Something bigger, a role that I had never dared to think of? These questions kept repeating, swirling like an instrumental song that grew louder and louder in my mind as if each note was revealing a mysterious piece of the family picture. The secret relationship between me and her was more than just a family affair. It was like a sign, a signal of a change, an earthquake that was about to happen under the calm exterior of the Carter family. And maybe I am the one who holds the key to open that door. My life went on quietly, revolving around daily work and discreet meetings with Margaret, a quiet rhythm that I thought would last forever. But then, disaster struck, suddenly, and without warning. One morning, I received a fateful phone call. My parents, Anna and David, had died in a small plane crash while on a business trip to Boston. My heart froze. All the sounds around me stopped. The world collapsed in a single breath. The two people who had raised me with sincerity, kindness, and simple yet profound principles were now gone forever. The small corner apartment in Queens, once filled with laughter, had turned into a cold void that covered everything. The Carters, what was left of them really, were there too. But they were there not to grieve, but out of duty, to maintain the facade of a prestigious family. Aunt Elizabeth, in her finely tailored black suit, her face perfectly made up, came up to me, taking my hand in a deadpan squeeze. "My dear Samantha," she said, her voice smooth as if she were reciting a memorized line. I am so sorry for your loss. Your parents, they really did live different lives. She paused, her eyes drifting to the simple wreaths sent by their colleagues and friends. I always say that a life too simple can sometimes be unrealistic. Things like this, it's sad, are sometimes the result of poor choices. Her words were like a cold knife piercing my heart, implying that it was my parents' simplicity that led to their deaths. James attended the funeral while enthusiastically making phone calls to discuss a new business deal. Laura and Claire stood still, occasionally throwing me looks that were a mixture of pity and curiosity. Their indifference, their pretense, made me want to turn away, to leave immediately. They had no idea that I was struggling not to collapse under the weight of loss. Amidst the air, a familiar figure approached. Margaret. She didn't need to say much. She just hugged me. A tight, sincere, emotional hug. Not an empty gesture, but the embrace of someone who knows what pain is and wants to share it with all her heart. My dear child, she whispered, her warm breath breathing life into my exhausted chest. I know how much pain you're in, but you have to be strong. Your parents would never want to see you fall. After the funeral, she began to see me more often. She invited me to her penthouse regularly, not to discuss work or business matters, but to join me in remembering my parents, to talk about them as real people, not the marginal figures the Carters had always considered inconvenient. She told me about my mother when she was young, about her quiet but intense dreams, about her sincere love for my father. Anna was an extraordinary woman, Samantha, she said, her eyes shining with tender regret. She always respected your mother's choices, even when no one else in the family understood them. She lived a remarkable life. She also spoke of the future, of her hopes for Carter Properties, but she didn't go into detail. Just vague hints that I would have a bigger role in the picture. My parents' deaths were a crushing blow, but they also forged a new resolve. I was no longer the quiet Samantha Carter I had once been. I began to work harder with a deep determination, not just for myself, but for my parents to continue their legacy. I wanted to turn planning ideas into real works, to create healthy neighborhoods, livable green spaces, things that people often forget in the race for profit. Even though I felt suffocatingly lonely, I knew I could not fall. I had to get up, I had to keep going, and prove that the values my parents believed in were absolutely right. The Carter family's indifference after her death only deepened the distance that already existed between me and them. I knew we were not from the same world, but what kept me thinking was Margaret. Her caring presence, her gentle words, her loving hugs, all genuine but with something else. She wasn't just comforting a grieving granddaughter. In the quiet glances, in the hints about the future of Carter Properties, I began to sense that something bigger was at work. A plan in which I could be a key piece. Maybe the shock of losing my parents, as devastating as it was the turning point. The catalyst for something to come. And I, Samantha Carter, could be at the center of that undercurrent, though I couldn't quite figure out what it was yet. After my parents died, my meetings with Margaret became more than a mental refuge from the storm. They gradually transformed, quietly but clearly, into invisible checkups, a series of challenges masked by hidden concern. She didn't ask, didn't give orders, just sent me emails late at night. The very hour when loneliness is most likely to make people's hearts honest. Each email was a thick file. Architectural drawings, financial reports, market analysis, from modest neighborhoods in Queens, where I could easily imagine children playing on their porches, to giant projects on Fifth Avenue, where glass and steel proudly tore through the New York skyline. Let me know what you think, Samantha, she wrote. No instructions, no limits. As if she wanted to see where I would position myself between the world of numbers and the invisible souls that inhabited each design. I am not allowed to reveal anything to the place where I work, a small nonprofit organization where we fight for the forgotten every day. During the day, I am still a diligent planning engineer, immersed in meetings and surveys. But at night, when the city falls asleep, I sit quietly at my desk in my small apartment, my eyes glued to every technical detail, every dry row of numbers. I do not simply consider profits, but also worry about the impact of each project on the community. Does it destroy public space? Does it push poor families away from the city center? I make proposals for affordable housing, for green buildings, for recycling materials, and integrating public facilities such as schools and health stations. I do not want to see a city only for the rich. I want to create decent cities, where every person has a place to live, to exist with dignity. I had no idea, at least not at first, that I was being compared. Margaret had quietly placed my proposals on the table alongside plans from Aunt Elizabeth and her children. I could imagine their reactions. Aunt Elizabeth, always well-groomed in a designer suit, would probably frown on concepts like equitable development and urban green space, dismissing them as unnecessary luxuries. She would only see land value, net profit, and payback period. James would surely be calculating how to minimize construction costs, even if it meant compromising quality. Laura and Claire? They probably didn't even read the plans, just whether the project was flashy enough to post on Instagram. For them, real estate was a game of power and image, not social responsibility. Meanwhile, I was quietly building another ideal, another character. I didn't brag. I didn't seek recognition, but I didn't shy away either. I believed in what I was doing. And although Margaret rarely gave me compliments, each short response from her, "That makes sense, go deeper," or "You've seen the essence," made me feel like I was on the right track. Maybe that was her way of showing support, not in words, but in continuing to send in more applications, continuing to put more faith in me. My family remained clueless. They still regarded me with a mixture of pity and contempt. During our brief artificial meetings, Aunt Elizabeth would make sarcastic comments. "Is Samantha still obsessed with social housing projects? How naive. When will she ever understand the real world?" James would sneer at my talk of sustainability, calling me daydreaming. Laura and Claire were too busy showing off their new purchases. They had no idea or no desire to know that I was playing a role in the company's big decisions, a role they had overlooked because they had long overlooked me. I didn't mind, because I sensed something bigger was happening. Margaret's evaluations were more than technical exercises. They were invitations of sorts, inviting me into another world, a space of power where my decisions could shape the city. I wasn't sure I was quite ready, but I knew Margaret was preparing me. And it became increasingly clear to me that behind her gaze, behind the silent hugs and the old stories, there was a plan, a game being played, and I was the key piece. Perhaps my parents' deaths were more than just a tragedy. They were the opening bells of a quiet shift. Margaret and I had always met at a small coffee shop in Brooklyn, where Margaret always sat by the window. But on that Friday afternoon, just a few weeks before her birthday party, she had asked me to come straight to her penthouse, an oddity. When I entered, the apartment was as sumptuous as ever, but the atmosphere was more formal, as if an important event were about to take place. Margaret sat at her mahogany desk, her eyes fixed on me thoughtfully. "Samantha," she said, her voice lower than usual, "there's something I want you to do. You'll know when to use it." She pulled open a drawer in her desk and pulled out a small, dark blue velvet box. I looked at it curiously. She opened it, and inside was a silver safe key, gleaming with antiquity. The key was unlike any I had ever seen. It was intricately designed, with curved lines and a large, meticulously engraved C representing the Carter family. She placed the key in my palm. I could feel the cold metal, but I also felt an invisible weight on my shoulders. "This key will open a door, Samantha," she continued, her eyes piercing my soul. "You must keep it safe. And most importantly, you must trust your intuition. It will guide you." I was confused. What did this key mean? A safe? Which safe? Mrs. Margaret did not explain further. She just looked at me, a mysterious smile flickering on her lips. I did not dare to ask more, because I knew her personality. When she decided to keep something secret, no one could change her mind. I carefully put the key in my bag, deciding not to open the safe right away. My intuition told me that the time had not come yet. I needed to wait. Needed to find out more. And most importantly, I needed to trust her advice. For weeks, I kept the key with me, always with me. I looked at it often, pondering its deeper meaning. Was it related to Carter Properties or some family secret? I couldn't figure it out. But then, a few days before the birthday party, a strong feeling came over me. It was an inexplicable urge, a little voice in my head that kept saying, "Go find it, open it." I decided to act on my hunch. I remembered that Margaret had a small safe in her penthouse office where she kept important documents. Key in hand, I went to the penthouse. The office was as clean and tidy as ever. I found the small safe hidden behind a large painting. The key fit perfectly into the lock. When I turned it gently, there was a click, signaling that the safe had opened. Inside, there was no money or jewelry, just a thick envelope with a Carter Properties seal. I picked it up, my heart pounding. I felt a jolt of electricity run down my spine. This envelope was the one I had placed on the table at the birthday party. I didn't open the envelope right away. I sensed that the moment was approaching, and that opening it had to be done at the right time and place. My intuition told me that this envelope would be the key, not only to unlocking Margaret's secret, but to changing the entire Carter family situation. Her hidden tests, her secret conversations, this key, it was all part of a grand plan. I felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Excitement because I was about to discover something so important, and anxiety because I didn't know if I could handle what was about to happen. But I also felt a new confidence. Margaret had taught me to trust my intuition, a quality she had always valued. Now my intuition was guiding me, and I knew I had to follow it. Margaret's mystery added to the pressure as I prepared to face my family, not knowing how the envelope would change everything, but I was ready. And then the day came, and I walked into Margaret's birthday party in a simple but elegant navy blue dress, like a warrior in soft armor, knowing full well that I was about to enter a familiar battlefield. One where the spears were not made of metal, but of the venomous words of Aunt Elizabeth and her 3 cousins, James, Laura, and Claire. I was no longer the vulnerable girl I had been. I had learned to wear an invisible armor that kept me from the contemptuous looks and sarcastic comments that were a daily occurrence. As soon as the door closed behind me, Aunt Elizabeth's cold gaze pierced me, full of malice, as if I were an unwanted blemish on the glamorous party. "Oh, Samantha made it," she said, her surprise so brazen it was enough to make everyone around her turn to look. "I thought you were so busy with those shabby housing projects that you forgot about Grandma's birthday. Or are you taking the opportunity to gossip about who gets more in the will?" Her words were like a small match that lit a fire in the dry pile of emotions inside me. Aunt Elizabeth continued her attack, this time without beating around the bush. "This girl is a disgrace to the Carter family. A family as prestigious as this has a granddaughter who is like a beggar, doing useless things all day long and has no money." Her voice rang out clearly in the crowded room, like a carefully prepared accusation to humiliate. My cousin James stood nearby, pretending to be indifferent but not hiding his eyes from every word. He and Laura began to openly discuss the division of the property, as if I were just a shadowy figure who should not be bothered. "James, what percentage of Carter Properties do you think she will leave us?" Laura whispered, loud enough for me to hear. "I just want a mansion in the Hamptons, big enough to host parties." James nodded. "You're aiming for prime land in the heart of Manhattan, with the potential to build a shopping mall." My cousin Claire leaned close to Laura's ear and smacked her lips. "Look at Samantha's shoes. They must have been bought at a flea market. They look so cheap." I kept my face impassive. The harsh words no longer moved me. I had heard them too many times. But then I felt eyes on me. It was Margaret. She said nothing, just looked at me, her eyes knowing and sharp. And then, in the moment when everything was approaching din, she spoke. Her voice was not high, but it echoed like a command. "Samantha, come sit next to me." The words were like a slash across the splendid banquet hall, cutting off all the laughter and crowded conversation. Aunt Elizabeth, who had been talking nonstop, suddenly fell silent, her face dark and stiff with surprise and anger. She had deliberately arranged for me to be in the farthest corner, as if to exclude me from the luxurious family picture. But Margaret, with a single sentence, had upset all calculations. raising the tension in the room to a breaking point. All eyes were on me: curiosity, discontent, and undisguised envy. I walked toward the table, each step slow and steady, as if paving my own path, a path no one else could decide for me. I sat down next to Margaret, feeling Aunt Elizabeth's burning gaze piercing my skin. The air in the room was so thick, so tense that a whisper could shatter it. I kept my composure, though my heart was pounding in my chest. I took a deep, deep breath and let it out evenly. A reminder rang in my head. I had to be strong. I had to show them that I was no longer the easily crushed girl I had been. Margaret smiled at me, a smile that was both gentle and meaningful. She said nothing more, just quietly placed her hand on mine, gently but firmly. Without words, I understood. She believed in me. She was betting on me, and I would not let her down. That belief was like a slow fire burning inside me, making me gradually regain my own spirit. After so many years of being despised, of being considered worthless, now was the time for me to prove otherwise. I reached into my bag, my fingers touching the thick, carefully prepared envelope. My heart rate increased. This was my moment. The moment to turn the tables, to rewrite my place in the Carter family. The room was still suffocatingly silent. Everyone was waiting, and I was ready to make the whole family open their eyes. I took a deep breath, feeling the suffocating silence that hung over the room like a thin layer of fog. All eyes were on me, cold, suspicious. Aunt Elizabeth looked at me with a frown as if she had detected a sour smell in the air. James frowned sharply, and Laura and Claire gasped in barely concealed shock. They still thought I was insignificant, not worth bothering with. But I knew this moment would shatter all prejudices. My hands trembled as I slowly pulled a thick envelope from my bag, placing it on the polished mahogany table, like clear water before a storm. Margaret nodded, a smile on her lips as if she were hiding a long-ago secret. It was a sign. I began to tear open the envelope, each movement slow but decisive. The sound of tearing paper rang out, piercing the silence like the opening bell. I pulled out a document, pages stamped with the red seal of Carter Properties. I held it up high so that no one could deny the truth that was present. "I think we should take a good look at what's inside," I said, my voice ringing with certainty, as if it no longer belonged to someone who had once been invisible. "This is the last will and testament of Margaret Carter, duly executed and authenticated." Before my voice could die down, Aunt Elizabeth jumped up. Her face was white with anger, as if the blood was rushing back to her heart. "What will? What are you doing again? Margaret, do you hear me? You're alive, you wouldn't make a will. She's manipulated you, right?" Her voice was razor sharp, a mixture of panic and anger, aimed at me like a weapon. I didn't back down. I looked straight at her, my gaze calm but firm. "I'm sorry, Auntie, but this is Margaret's wish, and it is legally binding." I turned to attorney Robert Thompson, who was sitting at the end of the table, looking as calm as if everything was going according to a script he had memorized. "Attorney Thompson, please confirm." Mr. Thompson, a middle-aged man in a neat dark blue suit, his gold-rimmed glasses glinting under the ceiling light, slowly stood up. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am Robert Thompson, the attorney representing Margaret Carter. I certify that this document is indeed Mrs. Carter's last legal will, executed last month. It has been authenticated by 3 independent law firms, ensuring transparency and undisputed." The confirmation was like a silent but powerful shock, piercing through all the layers of pride in the room. The whole family froze. I did not stop. I continued, my voice steady, like someone reading a final judgment. "With my clear mind and free will, I, Margaret Carter, have decided to transfer 65% of the shares of Carter Properties to my niece, Samantha Carter. From this moment, Samantha Carter will officially assume the position of Chief Executive Officer, CEO, and Chairman of the Board of Directors, with full authority to operate and make strategic decisions for the company." The air exploded. "What?" James roared, standing up, knocking over the chair behind him. His face was red, veins popping out on his forehead. "No way! Grandma, are you kidding me? Her? She lives in Queens doing some shitty planning project. How could she run the prestigious Carter properties? He stomped toward me, his eyes blazing. Who do you think you are, Samantha? Are you trying to destroy everything? James, stop, Margaret said. Her voice was as soft as ever, but there was an invisible weight that made James freeze, his eyes still burning but his feet unable to take another step. The look she gave him was as cold as tempered steel, forcing him back. Laura covered her mouth, her eyes wide as if the world had just collapsed before her. Claire burst into tears, but her sobs were insincere. Aunt Elizabeth almost collapsed into her chair, her hands clutching the armrests, her face as white as wax. No, no way. It's a conspiracy. Margaret, you've been tricked. That girl, she manipulated you. She pointed at me, her fingers shaking like dry twigs in a storm. You'll pay, Samantha. I'll sue. I'll fight to overturn this damn will. I looked at each familiar face, angry, shocked, confused. For years, I had been an outsider, overlooked, mocked behind my back. But here I was, the one person Margaret trusted. I felt not just elation, but living proof of the value I had quietly built. Power in this family was now mine, not as a gift, but as a position I had earned. Margaret smiled, her eyes sparkling as if she had just watched a costly drama. Her smile was not large, but it was enough to confirm that everything that had just happened was true. I, Samantha Carter, had become the ultimate power in the Carter family. This was no longer a struggle, but the beginning of a new era. And I knew that from this moment on, nothing would ever be the same again. After a moment of tense silence, the room exploded like a bomb had just been detonated. Aunt Elizabeth was the first to lose control. This damn will is fake. Totally fake. Margaret, you've been brainwashed by that girl. She's tricked you. I swear I'll sue. I'll fight to the end to overturn this fraud. Her voice was shrill and harsh, echoing through the stunned crowd. Without hesitation, she pulled out her phone and yelled at her lawyer, her words breaking into sharp, jagged lines. You have to do something. Now. We can't let that brat steal our inheritance. James, his face red as a fire, strode toward me, his fists clenched white. Who do you think you are to commit this treachery, Samantha? Do you intend to destroy everything this family has built? You will pay for your arrogance. I did not back down. My eyes met his, cold, calm, as if I had been preparing for this moment my whole life. I am only doing exactly what Margaret has chosen and believed in. Carter Properties needs a new direction, not the dark path you and Aunt Elizabeth have laid out. My words added fuel to the fire of anger. James roared, about to pounce, but Margaret's sharp voice cut him off. James, stop. If you dare touch her, don't blame me for cutting off our blood ties. She didn't need to shout. It was her icy calm that made James stop, breathing heavily like a cornered animal. Laura, her face white, changed her tone like a flip of a hand. Oh, Samantha, I know you're smart and capable. I always believed you would do great things for the company. Do you need an assistant? I'd be happy to help you. Her voice was soft as honey, the complete opposite of her usual disdain. I looked at her silently, no words needed. I was used to the masked faces in this family. Claire was sobbing, tears streaming down her face, but there was no pain in her eyes, but a careful calculation taking shape. But the storm didn't stop there. Immediately after the party, Aunt Elizabeth and James launched a dark media campaign. The tabloids were full of sensationalist claims that I had manipulated Margaret, that she had lost her mind, that the will was a blatant forgery. The public was shocked. The company was the focus of suspicion. Partners began to question it, and even the most loyal employees were confused. Then something unexpected happened. Claire, the cousin I had thought was all about partying and showing off, contacted me. Samantha, she said on the phone, her voice surprisingly quiet and serious. I want to see you. About work. I was surprised, but I agreed. At that meeting, Claire sat across from me. No more heavy makeup, no more haughty tone, just a girl trying to change. She asked for a lowly position in the company, expressing her desire to learn. I was still wary, but I also saw a fragile glimmer of light in the heart of someone who had only known how to live in luxury. I stood my ground. At the first board meeting, I announced the new rules, my voice booming in the gilded conference room. From now on, no one in the family is allowed to use the company credit card for personal use. If you want stock, you have to work for it. Carter Properties is no longer a playground for anyone to spend money. Aunt Elizabeth and James turned pale. I continued coldly. I have also requested an audit of all family expenses for the past 10 years. Any fraud will be exposed. The Carter family was deeply fractured. Aunt Elizabeth and James continued to attack me, step by step, move by move, like wounded beasts, but I was not afraid. I had Margaret behind me, the woman who had single-handedly built this empire, and above all, I had a vision, a clear ideal for the future. Claire was changing, really changing, while Laura was still struggling under the mask of sweetness. The power game had just begun, but I was ready to write a new chapter for both the family and the company. Once I took over the reins, the rebuilding of Carter Properties began. The first thing I did was to change the name of the company, a symbolic gesture and a clear declaration of a new era. Carter Sustainable Holdings. The name was not just a fresh coat of paint on an old brand, but my way of announcing that the company was entering a completely different chapter. I no longer wanted Carter to be remembered as a corporation that built cold, soulless concrete blocks. I wanted it to be a symbol of ethical development, of social responsibility, of long-term values that go beyond short-term profits. From now on, our direction will be green real estate, sustainable, environmentally friendly projects, and especially affordable housing for workers, people who are often forgotten in the map of elite interests. My first project, with all my passion and ambition, was a mixed-use residential complex in Brooklyn. But it was not just a modern apartment complex. I wanted to create a place where life was woven from simple, practical things: affordable apartments, tree-lined parks, schools for young children, health clinics, and local convenience stores. A true community, a place where people could live, work, relax, and connect, regardless of their social class. But every change comes at a cost. From the very beginning, I faced fierce resistance from the senior executives. They were used to the old way of doing business: high-profit projects, no regard for social impact. "What do you think you're doing, Samantha? This is a company, not a charity." Davies, the longtime CFO, shouted angrily at a board meeting. "Who would invest money in something with such low returns? You're risking all of our futures." They threatened to resign. They pressured me. They thought I was naive, that I was destroying the empire that the previous generation had built. And yet, Aunt Elizabeth's dirty media campaign continued to drown me in waves of rumors and fabrications. In the tabloids, I became a fraud, a puppet manipulating Margaret to gain power. They called me an inexperienced outsider, an unreasonable operator. Each news item, each article was like a dagger to the reputation I was trying to build little by little. Internally divided, externally attacked, there were nights when I returned to my apartment, my heart heavy with loneliness and exhaustion. But I did not allow myself to falter. I believed in the path I had chosen. I began to meet each shareholder, each director, not to convince them with vague slogans, but with data, with specific research, with images of cities that had successfully transformed themselves through sustainable development. I pointed out that social values were not at all opposed to profits, as long as we were patient and had a long-term vision. My persistence, after many months of non-stopping, finally gradually softened the once closed faces. And then the magic happened. Our Brooklyn project was unexpectedly honored by a prestigious architectural association, a national award for the year's most exemplary sustainable development project. It was more than a prestigious medal. It was undeniable proof that my strategy was absolutely right. The press changed its tune. The skeptics fell silent. Aunt Elizabeth's smear campaign took a heavy blow. Now, no one believed her words. After that turning point, things became easier. Directors who had been strongly against me were now the ones who spoke most strongly in support of me in meetings. I had proven that an ethical development model could be achieved while also being profitable. I had turned my vision of a sustainable real estate group into a reality. And from there, Carter Sustainable Holdings began to redefine its position in the industry. Of course, the resistance is not over. The conservative voices are still there, especially from my family. Aunt Elizabeth still lurks to undermine me, but her influence has faded. James watches quietly, his eyes full of resentment but no longer daring to openly confront me. I know that this journey will be long, full of twists and turns and challenges, but I have crossed the most difficult threshold. I have proven myself worthy, and I will continue to press on, not just for Margaret, but for the ideals I have sworn to uphold: integrity, perseverance, and a sustainable future for all. Among the relatives who had opposed me, Claire was the only one who showed a clear and seemingly sincere change. After the date she had proposed, I agreed to give her a chance. Not because I trusted her completely, but because there was a strange seriousness in her eyes that day, something I had never seen before. Claire started working in a low-level position in the public relations department of Carter Sustainable Holdings. Although everyone knew she was my cousin, I told the manager to treat her like any other employee. No exceptions, no special privileges. Claire would have to start from zero, learn everything from scratch. At first, I was wary. Having grown accustomed to the image of a proud, carefree, partying Claire, I thought she would quickly give up under the pressure of real work. But I was wrong. Claire surprised me by not complaining about the trivial tasks, not complaining about the strict hours, but taking the initiative to learn about the company's projects. She spent hours reading documents, paying close attention to meetings, asking intelligent questions, showing a seriousness that far exceeded my initial expectations. One of the first projects Claire worked on was a communications campaign in partnership with a nonprofit I had worked with. The goal was to raise awareness about the importance of affordable housing and community development. Claire threw herself into the work with an unprecedented spirit. From creating content, organizing events, to going directly to the field to interview people. No longer the young lady accustomed to living in luxury, Claire now got dirty, listened to real stories, and came up with creative, practical communication solutions. I asked my manager to evaluate Claire objectively and harshly. I didn't want anyone in the company to think she was getting preferential treatment because of her family ties. And the evaluation made me think. My manager confirmed that Claire was hardworking, eager to learn, and most importantly, had a positive attitude. She gradually changed the views of her colleagues, who were initially as skeptical as I was. After 6 months of hard work, Claire was promoted to Assistant Director of Public Relations. This was not an easy reward, but the result of a rigorous evaluation process, including a knowledge test and a face-to-face interview with me. I asked her many tough questions, wanting to see if the change was real or just an act. Claire answered confidently and convincingly, showing a remarkable maturity in her thinking and understanding of her role. Claire's change made me think about rekindling our family ties. I realized that anyone can change, if given the right opportunity. However, I still kept the necessary caution. Rebuilding the relationship takes time and effort from both sides, while the responsibility to protect the company was always my top priority. The trust between Claire and I was still fragile, a thin thread that could only be strengthened if nurtured bit by bit with patience and goodwill. But a glimmer of hope flickered in my heart. Perhaps this was the beginning of healing the cracks in the Carter family, a family that had been twisted by power and ambition. And I believed that if I continued to maintain that spirit, Claire would become a valuable ally, someone who truly understood and shared the vision I was pursuing. A year after I took over, Carter Sustainable Holdings has exceeded all expectations. Profits grew by 15% in the first year alone, an impressive figure given the volatile real estate market. But what I am most proud of is not the financial figures, but the fact that the company has been recognized as a national model for sustainable urban development. The projects we have implemented not only bring economic value, but also contribute to improving the quality of life, from reducing environmental pollution to providing quality housing for low-income families. Articles in prestigious newspapers and professional magazines have praised Carter Sustainable Holdings' vision as a model for responsible and humane development. Meanwhile, the family feuds, while not completely gone, were slowly unraveling, though not in the way I had hoped. Aunt Elizabeth and James, after several unsuccessful attempts at litigation, were losing influence. Their lawyers could find no loopholes in Margaret's will or in my takeover. Aunt Elizabeth, her pride deeply wounded, retreated to her Hamptons mansion, all but disappearing from public life. James, after a series of failed ventures and bankruptcy, had moved to Miami, relying on old connections and no longer having any influence at the company. Laura, after a long period of being lost in an obscure role within the company, decided to move into the events industry, where she found her own way, though our relationship remained guarded, as if something had never been said. On the contrary, Claire has completely integrated into the new rhythm of the company. She is not only an excellent employee, but also gradually becomes a reliable companion. We exchange work regularly and sometimes share with each other private things, worries that only insiders can understand. Claire has proven that her change is not temporary, but the result of a mature inner self and a real effort to start over. In honor of my parents, Anna and David Carter, who raised me with simplicity, kindness, and dedication, I have established a scholarship fund in their name. The fund will support students from disadvantaged communities pursuing a career in urban planning and sustainable development. I hope that the younger generation will have the opportunity to realize their dreams without financial barriers, and that they will carry on the humanistic values that my parents cherished. Not only that, I also renovated my parents' old apartment in Queens, turning it into a community center for children and youth in the area. What used to be a warm home for my family is now an open space, providing free classes in art, education, and life skills. Every time I step into that familiar room, I feel like my parents are still present somewhere. In every little detail, in the laughter of the children, and in the unfading loving energy. It is not just a social project, but also a way for me to preserve the memories and nurture the spirit that my parents passed on to me. The message I've learned throughout this journey is clear. A person's true worth is not in their wealth or status, but in their character, in how they live, how they treat others, and most importantly, in the positive impact they leave on their community. Money can buy luxuries, but it can't buy trust, respect, or a meaningful legacy. Through it all, I've learned something simple yet profound. Sometimes the greatest wealth is in the little things, the things my Carter family took for granted. After all the ups and downs, Margaret and I continue to work together to build a truly lasting legacy, not just in skyscrapers, but also in spreading human values. Margaret, now 81 years old, finds new joy in working with me. She is no longer the cold, stern woman of the early days. Every morning, she still comes to the office, not to check the books or question the directors, but to discuss new projects with me, to discuss ideas on how Carter Sustainable Holdings can contribute more to the community. Her eyes sparkle with pride when she sees me running meetings, when she hears me present about social initiatives. I see in her a satisfaction, a peace that she probably never had when she was only focused on making money and expanding the empire. She often tells me, "Samantha, you have accomplished what I could not do. You have brought soul to Carter Properties." The Carter family changed forever. Claire, as an unlikely ally, became my right-hand woman in the company. She was not only good at her job, but also a true friend. We went through many hardships together, and I knew I could trust her. Claire proved that her change was not just temporary, but a profound transformation. We often had lunch together, talking about work, about life, and sometimes about old memories, but without the harshness or discrimination that had been there before. Meanwhile, Aunt Elizabeth, after losing her lawsuit and losing her power, had become a complete recluse in the Hamptons. She rarely showed up, and her once lavish parties were now a dim memory. James, after going bankrupt and losing his fortune, had virtually disappeared from our lives. He moved to Miami, living off his old friends and connections, a sad end for someone who had been arrogant and dismissive. Laura kept in touch with me, occasionally sending polite congratulations via email when the company achieved new successes. She wasn't ready to fully reconcile, but at least she had realized that the world wasn't all about money and status. I stand in my new office at Carter Sustainable Holdings, looking out at the New York skyline, shimmering in the sunset. The city is vast and challenging, but I know I am standing firm. I am proud to have lived up to my parents' values, to have turned our family legacy into a positive force for society. I no longer feel like an outsider. This is where I belong, and this is the work I was born to do. On my desk, next to a stack of files and a computer, is an old photograph. It shows my parents, Anna and David, smiling brightly, and beside them is Margaret, younger and vibrant, her eyes full of hope. It reminds me of the journey we have taken, of the losses, the challenges, and the triumphs. It is a testament to resilience, to believing in the right values. The message I want to convey, the message I have learned through my life, is that the best revenge is not to defeat others, not to make them bow down to you. It is to live up to your ideals, to create a meaningful legacy that goes beyond money and power. It is to build something beautiful, something lasting, something that can bring value to many generations. I have done it not only for myself, but for the people I love, and for a better future for all. Thank you for listening to my story.